Hello, we're rolling into another episode of the DRH show. As usual, in each episode, I'll be talking to interesting people within psychology, mental health, and well-being. Today, I'm joined by a broadcaster, presenter, and producer. He also presents at Men's Radio Station. Phil Dave, thanks for joining me.
A great pleasure and an honor. What an unusual position to be in on the receiving end of the questions. I'm used to asking the questions. I confess, Dennis, I'm a bit nervous.
Yeah, really? Because for those who hasn't known you, and of course, I used to work for Men's Radio Station where you present. So yeah, it's quite a bit different now. But for those who hasn't heard of your background, Phil, if you could just share to us your backstory, your trajectory in life, and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Oh, there's a question. Okay, well, I will try and make it as brief as possible. I ended up in radio by accident. I am a broadcaster and a producer. That's the main line of work that I'm in. But if you want to include the proper day job, I'm also a computer technician, but let's not dwell on that. Mm-hmm. But as far as the broadcasting and radio is concerned, that was a little bit of an accident when, as part of the computer work that I still do and used to do, was design websites. Anyway, one day I was looking through a particular website of a radio station for a bit of design inspiration, and there was a frequently asked questions section. And in that FAQ section was, how do I get into radio? And it was kind of a light bulb moment. They just said, why not do either student radio, which I left school at the age of 15, so that was highly unlikely that I was going to go into student radio. But they also suggested hospital radio as well. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll do a quick search for hospital radio in Northwest London, which is where I lived at the time. Sure enough, one came up. I applied and off I went. And from then on, that led me to places such as the BBC, places where I am now, which is the Wireless Group. That's home of Talk Radio, Talk Sport, and Virgin Radio, and Times Radio now, of course. So that's really the briefest summary of my background and what I do now.
You did not mention Men's Radio Station. Of course, you also presented Men's Radio Station. Talk to us through about Men's Radio Station.
So the reason why I didn't mention Men's Radio is because I assumed and hoped that you would mention it separately, which I don't know if you have. Now, Men's Radio is almost like how I used to work with you, Dennis. I understand how you're going to work. But as far as Men's Radio Station is concerned, that was fascinating. That was because Men's Radio is founded by Russ Kane and another Howard Jameson, who they are together responsible for this, I think, brilliant initiative, which is all about talking about men's mental health and well-being, which is something that, okay, is a bit on trend. Some people do it once in a while on the mainstream, but there's no dedicated station, whether it be radio or television, to the best of my knowledge, that does it all the time, 24/7. And when Russ approached me and asked me whether or not I want to be a part of it, it didn't take long for me to say yes to it, because even though my involvement in it is very small in the grand scheme of things, I'm not going to for a second profess to be one of the champions behind it, because Russ and Howard and also the lovely Penny as well, who's their other business partner, all of them, they all work so hard to bring Men's Radio Station and Women's Radio Station, its sister station, to life, to reality. But I was just lucky enough to be one of the ones that Russ asked to be on air with him and to help co-present and sometimes co-produce as well. And it's just a remarkable service, one that gives people the opportunity to talk without any judgments. Now, I like to use the terminology a safe space, but Russ doesn't like that very much. So he instead says non-judgmental space. And I understand why he says that, because it's much more about people feeling that they are not going to be judged for just saying how it is they're feeling. And that could be a sense of either anger, upset, jealousy, bitterness, whatever it is, whatever the emotion that someone's trying to battle. You just know that at MRS and WRS, respectively, people are free to just say how they feel without sounding like they're going against the masses, because the chances are people listening are probably going through something very similar. And as a result of it, they share their feelings. And subsequently, it's grown into this nice little family, almost, as it were, of people just saying, actually, yeah, do you know what? I do find life a bit tough, or I am a bit upset about this, or I am really annoyed about something. And as a result of it, I think it really helps people to feel better. I see it as sort of small therapy, if I'm honest.
Of course, it's really important for us to share our experiences and our feelings. And so this is the reason why I really invited you, because a few days ago, I've seen your video on Facebook where you actually talk something that a lot of men don't really talk about, that they don't really open up. And the video I'm talking about is, of course, for those who have seen your videos on men's registration and on Facebook, you quite have a fluffy hair. But you reveal that it's actually just a facade. So I'll just leave it to you. Can you share to us the video that you posted on Facebook?
Yeah, certainly, no problem. So what it was is that I recently celebrated my 34th birthday, and
God, I feel old now.
yeah, well, what can I say? You are old, Dennis. You know, I mean, you don't look it, but you know, as far as age is concerned, not at all. But I still can't believe that you're older than me. But anyway, but the upshot is that the video that I posted was about me coming to terms with the fact that for the last few years now, I don't like the word suffering, because I think that no one in this country truly knows what suffering is. If you look at some parts of the world where they really do genuinely suffer, I find that a very overused term. So instead, I'll say experiencing hair loss. And when I say I've experienced hair loss, I mean that virtually the top of my head, and this is actually, if I'm honest, this is quite tough for me to admit this to you, because I don't think people would necessarily know this from looking at me. But the top of my head virtually has no hair. Now, you're looking at this now and you're thinking, but that's ridiculous. There's plenty there. Don't believe everything you see. This is not all hair. I use product to help me feel better inside, and also not to draw attention to the fact that I don't really have very much hair on top of my head. Now, that in itself is quite a big thing for me to confess, to be honest, because I don't really say it to anyone. I don't like to say it to anybody, because then it's reality sets in. But what I decided to do for my 34th birthday was to tackle the demons, because I actually did have, up until then, some hair around the edge of my head that was actually shoulder length. And what I was doing was I was gathering it all towards the top, to the middle, to make it look like there was a mass of hair on top. It actually had grown in that way. You know, I'd sort of trained my hair just to grow towards the middle and cover up what wasn't there. But it got silly after a while, because there's only so many days, weeks, months, years you can go through strand after strand coming out in your fingertips, and in the bath when you're getting out and you just wash it all away, and you just see a part of your identity just disintegrating before you. So I decided there and then that enough was enough, and I had to be true to myself, because actually part of the problem, and I thought this was quite interesting as well, part of the problem was actually watching that hair fall out. So it wasn't just the fact that there was no hair there, it was the strands in the fingertips that were part of the problem. So in the end, for my 34th birthday, the video that you refer to is of me shaving what hair I have left off, and it's now a number 3 grade all over. And I just thought enough was enough.
Yeah, it's time to move on, because you used the word identity earlier. I really love how you describe hair as part of our identity. And you know what? The reason why I really wanted to talk to you about this is I know I still have my hair, but I know at one point I will also go to the same experience, because my dad, my uncle, all of my uncles are bald. I'm quite lucky, because my dad, he lost his hair when he was 30. And all my uncles, they were bald at the age of 25. So I know it's only a matter of time that I will also get to experience the same. I'm already starting to kind of see the symptoms, because I used to really have a thick hair. It's all standing out, and they're starting to get thin by the day. And what you've said, that you really see your hair being, you know, disintegrate every day. I kind of experienced that. So I know that at a later point, I will get to experience that. Okay, now Phil, at what age did you notice that you're going bald?
Oh, now that's interesting. Do you know what? I'm actually not, genuinely, I'm not sure. Because I know that it's been the last few years, but I believe that I was in denial so long that I'm not sure I really noticed when the first few strands started falling out. I reckon, realistically, it's probably been the last 3 or 4 years. I'd probably say not long after I hit 30, I reckon. So I was very lucky to have my hair in my 20s because my father also has lost a lot of his hair. He's still got some, but he lost a lot of his hair in his 20s. So for that reason alone, I too, I suppose, have been very lucky. But what was interesting, though, is that you were saying about how your father and your uncles have also lost their hair. But my aunt, who happens to be a hairdresser, she's not my hairdresser, but she is a hairdresser, has always told me that we take the genes for our hair from our mother's line. Now, curiously enough, I'd always heard it was the father's line as well. But even so, whoever's line we do take it from, I think that if one parent does suffer with hair problems, the chances are that you may well experience it yourself. But apparently, according to my aunt, who's a hairdresser, she says it's the mother's line. But what's really frustrating is that my mother has got a very, very thick head of hair. So I thought, if that's the case, my goodness me, what a way for me to buck the trend. But anyway, as far as, when I first started losing it, realistically, it was probably not long after I turned 30.
I've also heard of that, that you actually inherited from your mom, from your mom's gene, but sometimes it really doesn't follow that trend because, like what you've said, my mom also has got thick hair. Her dad also got thick hair, but sometimes you can't just really predict how you would, turn out when it comes to your hair.
I think that's the whole point, is I actually do believe that it's luck of the draw. I'm really not personally convinced that you do take it because there are so many different causes of hair loss. It's not just genetic. I think a lot of people forget that stress is a terrible cause of hair loss. There are those who suffer with, of course, alopecia, which is hair loss, but alopecia isn't usually, and I'm no medical expert, but obviously I've done research into it, and alopecia is typically brought on from stress.
Now, would you like to expand on the psychological impact of baldness?
Absolutely. Well, from my point of view, the psychological impact was, I feel like it was one of great anxiety. That's the only way I can describe it. I was dreadfully anxious at the prospect of my hair falling out because for those, and I really don't expect anyone watching this to know this, but for those who maybe do, forgive me, but my hair for a long time was my trademark. It wasn't just that I had hair and that was it, is I used to wear my hair in a very, very specific way. So, and I don't know if I send you a photo later, you're welcome to share it with people just so they can see what I was talking about. But just to describe it, it used to be quite long on top, but quite spiky. The only way I could think of describing it is, imagine, if you will, the love child of Gary Rhodes and Marge Simpson. Now, I know that's a terrifying prospect, but that was kind of the look, I suppose, is that it was that kind of palm tree effect. It was quite tall as well. And that was for a long time what I had that hairdo. The reason why I had that, just so you know, is not because I had a desire to look ridiculous, which I suppose in hindsight it was quite a strange look. But I had that because working in an industry such as radio, where it's essential to stand out wherever possible, I suppose I just thought, I've got to do this. I've absolutely got to do something that makes me stand out from the others. So, there was other elements as well. The way I dress is relatively old-fashioned, and then the hair was sort of the crown and glory. Anyway, getting back to the psychological impact, which is, of course, your original question, was anxiety was definitely the overriding sensation. So I would either stand in front of the mirror and spend ages trying to cover up the patches that were developing. I mean ages. I would stand there for a long time trying to pull the hair in certain directions just to make sure that it didn't show at all and that I was hiding it as best as possible. I also decided as I mentioned, I had sort of some shoulder length hair, not so much the side of my head, but on just what was left around the top. I decided to grow really long again, just so I could gather it into the middle, just to cover it up wherever I could. But every single time I was doing that, I just felt so hurt. It sounds so silly, but a lot of it was about why me? You know, why is this happening to me? My hair is such a massive part of my mere identity. So why would my hair do this to me? Why would it let me down like this? I also thought to myself, people will never look at me in the same way again. There's no chance of me being successful in what this is all that was going through my mind. It is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, but it is kind of how I felt. I used to think that no one will ever give me a chance in work. And you know what the irony is? I feel like I've done more on air work since I've had short hair. It's absolutely ridiculous, but it's kind of true that I thought no one will ever give me anything on air because you don't see presenters with no hair, which again is not true.
Not true.
Okay, yes, there are mainly those who work in presentation on television, and mainly in radio as well, who do indeed have quite thick heads of hair. But there are absolutely those who don't. It's not that nobody does. And frankly, even if they don't, do you look at a presenter and think to yourself, my God, look at the state of his hair? You don't think like that at all. The irony, of course, being is that people used to look at my hair and think, good God, look at the state of his hair, because it was that trademark look that I was talking about, and it was just so stupidly unusual. I think that's when people used to criticize my hair rather than now, where actually people have been incredible, really incredible in terms of the comments I've got and support over something so trivial to the masses. Clearly means a lot to me, and it's really nice the way that people have been since I actually decided to reveal all. Well, not all, but reveal most.
I suppose it goes back to what you said earlier. It's really part of your identity. So that's why you have a bit of a preoccupation, how, you know, people would perceive you. And what I want to ask you is that when you noticed that you're starting to experience baldness, did you have some sort of remedies that you tried?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my goodness. Yes. Wow. I mean, I can't count. Luckily, actually, let's talk about this for a second, because you know what? There's one thing I've noticed in my time of hair loss. I hate the term journey. It's so cliche, but you know what I mean? Since I started losing my hair, the one thing I've noticed that there are so many companies out there that offer all these remedies and solutions and transplants, non-surgical and surgical, and they all have one thing in common. You don't get much change from thousands of pounds. They prey. They prey on people's vulnerability when they're at their absolute lowest. This actually, I feel like this is actually quite the same as slimming classes. The main difference with slimming classes, though, is that that's a healthy option. You know, when people go to diet clubs, that's actually helping them become healthier. Hair loss isn't. That's pure vanity. Okay, let's be honest. You know, there is nothing that could make you want to keep your hair other than pure vanity and the worry about what others might think, when pretty much no one will care less. Frankly, I believe that hair loss is far. I'm sorry if this causes letters or anything, but don't complain, because I just believe it's to be fact that I think hair loss is far worse for women than it is for men. You know, people somehow don't look twice at a man who's lost their hair, but if there's a woman who's losing her hair, then they start to notice it a bit more. But in particular, the remedies I was going for was just unbelievable. There were various shampoos that I would try, thinking I was told that this would help create a thicker hair, and also it would sort of help with the bits that had fallen out and stimulate growth. And of course, none of them do. They absolutely none of them worked. Now, whether or not that is because part of it was a placebo effect, where I had to sort of think myself almost as in, yes, this is helping, I can feel the hair stimulating, and out it came again. I don't know. I don't believe that's the case. I just think that the main trick that most of these shampoos and products use was to make the hair you do have look a bit thicker. And yes, that does help, but it's not the answer. If you don't have much hair in between, then there's no point.
It's really just an illusion, because it just makes it really look fuller, but it doesn't really address the root cause. But what about Minoxidil? Have you tried that? I think there's another one, finasteride.
Yeah, I didn't try those, but what I did try was one, and I can't believe that this has escaped my memory. I've got a feeling. Would it be called Nioxin or something like that?
Yeah, Nioxin. Yeah, I've heard of that.
Okay, so I did try Nioxin as a hair product, as a hair shampoo, and that was probably, yes, it was Nioxin, and that was probably the most successful of all of them. Now, that didn't necessarily, they're not paying me to say this, by the way. I don't use this anymore. I haven't used it for a long time, but in the early days I used it, and I did definitely notice thicker hair. But again, that's all it really was thicker hair. Now, they claim to make a difference. I tell you, Nioxin is commonly used, actually, and those types of shampoos are typically used for patients who have gone through chemotherapy. Now, thank God, a million times I've not experienced that. That was absolutely not the reason why my hair fell out. But they say that it's really good for patients who are going through, or have been through, rather, not going through. I don't think you can use it whilst you're going through it, but have been through chemotherapy. And the reason is that once you've had chemotherapy and your hair has fallen out, the hair is naturally much thinner then, because your body's been poisoned. That's what chemotherapy ultimately is a poison to kill any disease that's within you. And as a result of it, the hair falls out. So what the Nioxin and other products like that does is it actually thickens the sprouts of hair that are growing back. And that's why it looks better, and it helps people who have gone through that to not grow their hair quicker, but to notice it less and quicker, if you see what I mean. So notice the actual thinness of the hair a lot less, and to make it appear like it's growing back faster than it possibly is. So from that point of view, Nioxin was a terrific product. But again, sadly, it just didn't work for me. I genuinely believe the bottom line is that there is no product out there that, whatever it does, claims to help your hair grow back. From what I've tried and the money that I've spent, and believe me, it's been a lot of money I've spent, not thousands, because that I think is rolling into the territory of hair transplants, and I've looked into that. Can talk about that in a second, but I've absolutely looked into it. Several places I went to for quotations, and that experience is interesting in itself, actually. But as far as the products I've used, I really believe wholeheartedly there aren't any products out there, and I'm sure I'm going to get people complaining, say, well, actually, our product does wonders. Well, maybe. But then also you have a disclaimer that says it doesn't work for everyone. And guess what? None of them work for me.
Okay. Now, you mentioned about, sorry.
So I just want to say, I think the upshot is you've got to be very lucky if those products do work for you.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned about hair transplant. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, how long have you got? Well, let's look at hair transplants. Well, as soon as I realized that it was looking pretty rough, and when I say looking rough, I don't mean to others, I meant to me. For me, it was looking rough. I wasn't very happy with it at all. Still not, but, I'm happier. But I thought, right, I know what I'm going to do. Whilst my hair is still long enough to cover up the bits that have fallen out, I'm going to look into hair transplants, and I will see whether or not I can get away with that, so that hopefully it was all about no one noticing. Even though I knew they had to have noticed. They're not visually impaired. Right. So it had to have seen it, because I could see it. I look in the mirror, I can see it. So I know it was there, and other people knew it was there. The difference was it didn't bother them. It bothered me. And that's why I was noticing it. But anyway, I thought I'll get hair transplant surgery, because if I do that whilst the hair around the side is still long enough, then there's a fairly strong chance that no one would notice. Anyway, I looked into both surgical and non-surgical. And as I said a little earlier on, there's one thing that they have in common, all of these things, and that is that I really believe, and I'm not naming names of, and by the way, this is absolutely no reference to the products I've already mentioned, by the way. I'm talking about those who offer clinical solutions to hair loss. And without mentioning names of any clinics, what I believe is that they prey on people's vulnerability. Because what happens is you have someone who is so sad and so upset inside, that they would do anything, and most of them, not me, most of them would spend whatever money they can to try and remedy this, because they think that if they spend a few thousand, and make no mistake, it is a few £1,000s on this particular problem, that they can make it go away, which is distinctly possible. Some of these clinical places have got amazing results. I'm not knocking that. They absolutely work for a lot of people. Not everyone, but a lot of people. they mainly work for. And you look at before and after videos, and I don't think they've been airbrushed. I really believe that's what people have experienced and have gone through, and great for them. I'm really happy for them that it worked for them. But one thing I'm very unhappy about is that hair loss treatment is not accessible to everybody. Okay, there are an awful lot of things that you can get thanks to our wonderful NHS, but I believe quite rightly hair loss treatment isn't one of them. And the reason why I say quite rightly is because, again, it's vanity. It's not for health. There's a great reason why I believe that a lot of cosmetic surgery, unless it's to correct an actual accident or scarring, I don't believe that much cosmetic surgery should be available on the NHS, because, again, it's all vanity. And vanity is not an excuse to ask someone else to spend a lot of money on you. But even so, I was fully prepared to fund this privately. But looking into it, genuinely, I think the cheapest option I could find was non-surgical hair transplant. There's two types of hair transplant surgery, as it were. There's non-surgical and then there's surgical. The surgical one is where they usually take strips of hair from the back of your head, stitch the gap up, if you will, between, so you maybe have a nice little facelift in the process. But what they do is they take strips from the back of your head and then they implant them on top of your head or wherever you've lost the hair. It's quite clever stuff. It's quite dramatic, but that's one type of hair loss surgery. And again, usually that's quite successful. And the reason why that's successful is because scarcely do people lose the hair at the back of their head. So even if you are going bald, it's not very often that you lose the hair at the back of the head. So as a result of it, if you've got those kind of roots on top of your head, then they kind of stay put, you see. So that's why that's quite successful. But again, thousands of pounds for that. And I didn't really want anything that dramatic. And I certainly didn't want anything that was going to stop pulling my face like a bulldog clip or anything like that. No, thank you very much. So I decided against that. But then I looked into non-surgical. Now, I should mention the other type of surgical, by the way, is where they actually implant little hairs. I don't know if you've seen this particular procedure, but they actually spend hours and hours and hours. You sit in a chair where they literally implant tiny little strands of hair all over the head. Extraordinary procedure to watch that. I actually did watch videos of it, and it was incredible to watch it. Hours and hours, sitting in a chair, lying on the back, just with someone literally, frankly, sticking needles in your head. Amazing to watch, but again, not for me, because I'm not the biggest fan of needles. Anyway, so I decided to look at the non-surgical option. I thought that was going to be the most feasible for me. Now, non-surgical is incredibly clever, because if you get decent non-surgical hair transplants, then you would be forgiven. Anyone being an onlooker would be forgiven for thinking that that person has a full head of hair, and you never know that what they're actually wearing is a hairpiece. Because I think in the days gone by, we'd often refer to them as toupees, the hairpieces that sort of would just sit on top of the head. But now toupees are a long way in the past, because the technology is there to make it blend in considerably more with someone's natural hair that's growing around the sides. So I looked into this, and the cheapest I could find, are you ready for that? You might want to get a calculator standing by for this. The cheapest I could find was you'd spend about £500 for the hairpiece. Okay. So the actual hairpiece is all custom made. Well, not all. You get some off the shelf, but in an ideal world, they're custom made, because then they go with your hair and they fall in line with the hair growth and all that. Anyway, custom hairpiece, £500. Now, that sounds great if it's a one-off. Hair pieces usually need to be changed every 2 to 3 months. So if you're spending £500 on the hair alone every 2 to 3 months, you could almost think, okay, that's expensive, but still, all right, I could maybe manage that. But what they don't say is that then you have to have the applying process, which usually has to be done professionally. You can do it yourself, but it doesn't look as good, so you normally have it done professionally. That's usually anywhere between £70 and £100 each time. They recommend you have it reapplied once a month. So now we're talking £500 every 2 to 3 months, £70 to £100 every month. And then that does not include the products you need to maintain your hairpiece. So then what you're looking at is the adhesive that they use for the top of the scalp, which obviously has to be a certain type. You can't just go sticking Gorilla Glue on there, because otherwise you'll end up damaging your scalp. So absolutely you have to use the proper products. And they can be anything from about £30 for a little jar or something like that. Okay, it lasts a few months, but it's not the point. You still spend £30 on that. Then you have to spend money on the specialist shampoo, because you can't just use ordinary shampoo on these hair pieces. They'll disintegrate. They'll fall apart if you do that. So you have to use, I think it's like non-chemically treated shampoo. So you buy those. They're also about maybe £15-20 a bottle. Then you got the conditioner, another £15-20 a bottle. Are you keeping up with me so far? Because then now we're talking about 500 every 2 to 3 months. We're talking 100 every month, or 70 to 100 every month. You're then talking about 60 to 70 pounds worth of products as and when it's needed. And that is in between any particular hair products you want to use, such as waxes, hairspray. It really adds up. Okay. So even though, yes, it's absolutely an option, and it's arguably a heck of a lot cheaper than the thousands of pounds you could spend on transplant surgery, if you don't have that kind of money in one hit, you could easily spend thousands over a few years. Easily spend that. And, you know, I just thought to myself that I'm like many young professionals in London, desperately trying to wriggle my way onto the property ladder. And the truth is, how on earth could I justify spending that kind of money on vanity? Doesn't make sense. So that's when I really sort of thought, I've got to take charge of these demons. I can't do this anymore.
Exactly. And like what you've said earlier, it's tied in with the idea that it's vanity, and I think it's supposed comes from, you know, lack of self-esteem, which I think this is a cue for us an opportunity for us to talk about men's mental health, because I think it comes from the idea that men are really not confident about, you know, talking about how they feel inside, and so they kind of resort to these things to make themselves feel good and feel better. Would you say?
Absolutely, they would. And like I said at the start of the show, and again, this is not something I openly admit. So there you go, Dennis. This one is for you. What you see is not what you get. All right. My hair on top of my head does not look like this after I've just washed my hair. Okay. There's very, very little hair on top of my head right now. And this product that I do use, which is sort of like a hair fiber, that's totally the reason why I use it, because it makes me feel better about myself. I don't do it for anyone else. Again, I stand by it. I don't think anyone would care less. If I was walking around without hair on, I mean, those who know me know I walk around most of the time with a hat on my head anyway. So that wasn't, it's not really a problem if they see underneath. They very scarcely will. But I don't think that anyone should underestimate what it's like because no one prepares you. I don't know whether or not you've had this chat with people. Maybe you have, but I didn't. No one ever prepares you for growing old. Isn't that weird? No. How you think about sort of everything we talk about in life, how you mustn't talk to strangers, how you got to be careful of that. Everyone says about how you got to be careful, look both ways when you cross the street. Everything's about looking after yourself physically. That's great. But no one talks about growing old. And I think it's because we don't like to admit it. No one likes to admit it, but the only surefire guarantee is that for as long as you live, the older you get. You know, Benjamin Button, I hate to tell you, was a fictional character. No one grows younger. And I believe that if we were more open and honest about growing old and say, look, do you know what? Yes.
Or even dying.
Or even, absolutely, we don't talk about death at all. It's shocking. But if we were to talk more about how our skin will start to not be as taut as it once was, rather than just saying, oh, it's okay, just get Botox and fillers and facelifts and stuff like that. And then very soon you won't be able to blow out your candles. It's ridiculous. I mean, why do we do this to ourselves? It's because I've got a couple of theories about this. Number one is because no one wants to admit it. It's a very hard thing to admit. But growing old, you change your appearance, your body changes physically, your attitude probably changes mentally as well, because people become a bit more tired upstairs, so they probably don't start having the same level of fight in them. Aging is cruel, but it's also something that for as long as people live is going to happen to everybody. No one escapes that. And sometimes part of that aging process is hair loss. And I just think that if someone had sort of said that to me, and I don't blame my parents, for goodness, it makes me sound like I blame my parents for not talking about getting old. No one talks about it. This is not just parents' responsibility. Absolutely nobody talks about getting old. You hear a lot of people, this is very cliche, you hear a lot of people say, oh, do yourself a favor, don't get old. Mm-hmm. Now, that's really negative connotation. Mm-hmm. Really, really negative. Do yourself a favor, don't get old. What a thing to say. Mm-hmm. of course you're going to get old. Everyone's going to get old. Well, you hope everyone's going to get old. Like I said, if you're lucky enough to live, everyone is going to get old. And that's the awful truth of it. So hair loss is just part of that. So my theory is that we need to be more open and honest about talking about aging. So if people are going to age, things are going to happen. You tell those people those things are going to happen, and then it's less of a shock when it does. That's the first thing. What else I blame is society. And again, it's not really a word I like to use because society is one glove fits all. But I mean society because primarily I think this is. If you look at mainstream media, and I made reference to this a little earlier on, but if you look at mainstream media, there are actually very few people in mainstream media who have a lack of hair. I can only think of one female who has no hair, and that's the lovely Gail Porter. I don't know if you're familiar with Gail Porter, but she is a remarkable human being who's been so open and honest about her hair loss. She's amazing. And I don't know her personally, but we follow each other on Twitter, and I'm often very impressed with how open and honest she is. And I'm perfectly sure she's been an inspiration to an awful lot of people out there, or an awful lot of women in particular, who have gone through hair loss. But apart from her, you can't think of any other famous female who's gone through that. But then you look at men, and yes, there are some. So you think of the likes of maybe Harry Hill. He's quite famous without hair. And then I know there's a sorry, say again.
George Chalagaya, the BBC News reader, but he's not reading news anymore.
Yeah, well, that's sadly because George is actually quite ill, so that's primarily why. But I mean, and I very much hope George is okay. I haven't really sort of used to want to see him wandering around the BBC often, but yes, absolutely. So indeed, George Alagaya is another when he is on air, and of course there are people out there, but there's not as many, and not that there should be, but there's not as many as those who have hair. And in particular, when you look at programs. And I know this is not necessarily aimed for yours and my age group, Dennis, but if you look at programs such as Love Island, okay, what kind of message does Love Island send out to people? It says you can be as sleazy as you want. You can sleep with whoever you want to, whoever you feel like it, whenever you feel like it. And by the way, you have to have the body of a Greek god. What kind of message does that send out to people? That is shocking on so many levels. What a dreadful, dreadful excuse of a program that is. Because single-handedly, I believe that kind of program, and it's not just Love Island, let's be honest, there are loads of programs like it. You can sit here and list the likes of Hollyoaks are very similar. You've got loads of different other teenage dramas across America and things like that. They're all there. They're all just as guilty. For as long as you have individuals on screen and in the mainstream media who have the perfect body with a full head of hair that looks this amazing hairdo, you're going to send out the message to people that this is how you need to look. And if you look any different, you're odd. And if you're odd, you're unacceptable. And it's all so wrong. So I think it's those two factors mainly. I think it's the fact that we don't talk about it openly and honestly amongst ourselves. And I believe that society at large expects to see it on screen. And that is also wrong as well. And I think if those two problems, they're massive problems, but if those two problems were addressed, I don't even think you and I would be having this conversation now.
So we don't talk about identity, about body image, about aging, as you've said, the process of aging. And I think another thing that we don't also talk a lot about is men's mental health. And so that's why I think that's at the core of men's radio station. So I just want to shift the conversation to men's mental health, which of course this is still part of men's mental health. Identity, about how you feel when your body starts to get old. So from a personal standpoint, where would you say that where are we now when it comes to stigma around men's mental health?
Well, I certainly think that from what I've seen, stigma is greatly improved, and that's because there are great champions of mental health and well-being out there, not least of all our future king and queen of this country, of course, Prince William and Kate as well. They're both absolutely remarkable when it comes to talking about mental health and encouraging others to do the same. So I think that we are starting to see this fundamental shift away from stigma associated with mental illness. I worry that actually, funnily enough, that we might be shifting a little too quickly, because what's happening now, what I've seen anyway, is that people are either because they're more aware of it or because actually people are not making any efforts to, and I'm not suggesting people should make an effort to conceal how they feel, because otherwise I wouldn't be here talking to you right now. But because people don't make so much of an effort anymore to conceal how they feel, I feel like we're seeing now a lot more delicacy in society. You know, people are far more delicate. Do you know what I mean? It's, in other words, what you're actually seeing is people are not coping very well with life because we're so open and honest about mental health. Now, there's still a way to go before it becomes normality, but I think because we are actually quite open and honest about it, what's happening is people are more aware of their emotions, and they're not necessarily sure how to deal with those emotions, because actually we're kind of opening the floodgates before we have systems in place to deal with those emotions. So, for example, let's look at the coronavirus as a prime example of that, because now that we've sort of spent the last, maybe I don't think it's as long as 10 years, but certainly 5 years. Let's say we've spent the last 5 years on a national scale talking more openly and honestly about mental health, and encouraging people in schools and in workplaces to say how you're feeling, and hey, if you're having a rubbish day, it's fine, it's no problem. And it is. All of that is absolutely great, and it's totally and utterly fine. But what's happening now is, because we don't have measures in place to deal with those emotions, such as therapy, for example, to some. I know that it's out there if you go and ask for it, but hey, why isn't it in schools? You know, why isn't it readily available in schools, so that if someone is feeling a bit glum, and I hate that, it's such a dreadful word to use, but you know what I mean? If someone is feeling a bit down in the dumps and a bit unhappy, that there is someone that they can go to who will actually not just say to them, well, how are you feeling? You know, and I'm not talking about the psychiatrist chair here. I'm talking about systems in place that will help them deal with those feelings. So what is that? You know, what's one of those therapies? It's not cognitive behavioral therapy. It's, Dennis, help me out here. My memory is going here. It's the, I'll think of it in a minute. I can't think of the process, but you know, there are techniques. Okay. Mindfulness. That's it. Sorry. So mindfulness techniques, that people can use to actually help them with dealing with their emotions. And because that's not readily available, because it's not taught, I think what we're seeing is, like I say, this seismic shift where we're going from an age where no one spoke about mental health, everyone covered it up, and everyone just got on with their daily lives. And if you felt a bit down, then you just close yourself away and stiff up a lip, keep calm, carry on, that kind of attitude. We've shifted away from that now, but we're not quite at the point where it's normality yet, where we are seeing people able to deal with those emotions. You know as well as I do, you trip over, you cut your knee, what do? You stick a plaster on it, you hope it heals. If it's very bad, you go to A&E, you get yourself sorted with the NHS, the marvelous NHS, and hello to NHS again, we love you. But you know, there are measures in place to tackle these things, okay? But there aren't measures in place yet to help the masses deal with emotions. So that's where I feel like we're at the moment. So I think although the stigma is disintegrating, which is great, I don't think that society is ready to open these floodgates yet, because we don't have the measures in place to deal with it. And that's what worries me.
Mm-hmm. So it's not just enough for us to just openly talk about mental health, but we should be in a position where we can actually, you know, address the cause and offer appropriate measures to address mental health. Now, those are very interesting insights from you, Phil. Now, let's move on from talking about men's mental health and baldness to actually more of the human side of Phil. Let's talk about your line of work, because aside from men's radio station and aside from talk radio, you also host a few podcasts. So if you could just tell us about it.
Yes, the podcasts. Well, it's actually not just about hosting podcasts, funnily enough. I mean, I'm sure people are gathered by now I like to talk, because I'm sorry, Dennis, I know this is the Dennis Relojo-Howell show, but I feel like you haven't done much talking, so I can only apologize.
You're the star of the show. My guest is always the star of the show.
Very kind to say so, but no, not at all. This is your show, and I'm sorry, I hog it as usual. But anyway, but as far as me, the person's concerned with podcasting, yes, I like to talk. Mm-hmm. So what better way to do it? And actually, I feel that maybe I should explain why I think I went down the route of radio, if I may. And that is because I know this is not necessarily what I'm here to talk about, but one of the reasons why I think that I work with my voice is because for as long as I can remember, I'm talking early years at school here, I always used to get picked on for the way I spoke. Always. for as long as I can remember. That is my lasting memory throughout school. It didn't matter which school I went to. And I have to tell you, there were a total of 7. Okay, for whatever reason. School and me did not get on. Like I said, I left at the age of 15. It was hell on earth for me, but let's not go on that particular path. But the reason that I talk about it is because that each of those schools, there was one common thing, and that was the way I spoke. And I don't know whether or not it was a case of people were threatened by it, or whether or not it was a case of people genuinely thought it sounded strange to them. I don't know. But I suppose they've always spoken with received pronunciation for as long as I can remember. I have always been quite stiff upper lip, plum in the mouth, and whatever other ridiculous cliche you want to use to describe the way I talk. And I believe that because a lot of people don't necessarily talk like that, they probably thought, oh, you just sound ridiculous, man. Why are you talking like that? So that was always, I think, at the back of my mind. So when I had this light bulb moment that I was talking about earlier, when I was going through this website and it said, how do you get into radio? That's where it kind of dawned on me. I thought, well, what better way to stick a proverbial couple of fingers up to those individuals who spent years lambasting my voice than to actually use my voice to earn me money? Mm-hmm. That was kind of the way I thought. So anyway, I think that's why I ended up in radio. And now I reckon in hindsight, actually, that the bullying that I went through probably made me the strong and determined character that I am today. And I know it can go one of either ways. And I'm very lucky it did go this way, because to many people, it can actually make them feel worthless. And sadly, you see an awful lot of people take their life from that because they simply can't deal with the world around them telling them that they're worthless, which of course is just not true. Mm-hmm. So just for the record, to anyone who is watching this, by the way, and anyone going through a similar thing or went through a similar thing, let me be very, very clear to you now. It took me a long time to realize that it's not you who's got the problem. And even now, if I occasionally come up against people who will pick on me for whatever reason, it's them. They're the ones who have the issue, not you. Just remember that. Anyway, back to the podcast, which is what you were asking me about. The podcast in particular is something that I discovered. I think I was quite late in the game to discover podcasts, because even though they have only really been properly, how long do you reckon that podcasts have been really popular now? I reckon it's been about maybe 4 or 5 years.
I would say 10 years.
But I think 10 years is when they probably first came out. But I'm talking about really popular now, where people have said, oh, have you downloaded this podcast? Or have you? I reckon that's about 4 or 5 years. But in terms of absolutely when they first came about, maybe about 10, maybe even 15 years ago is when the first podcasts came out. Mm-hmm. So I've only been working in podcasts probably about, I reckon, maybe 6 years. So maybe I wasn't that late to the game, but still, maybe about 6 years I've been working in it. And the podcast I work on in particular, I am from a Northwest London Jewish background. So one of the programs I work on looks at Jewish life and culture in and around the UK, and sometimes further afield as well. We'll cover America and other countries as well. So that's one that I work on. Then I work on a Jewish news-based podcast. So this is where there's a paper out there, newspaper out there called, funnily enough, The Jewish News. And they have a weekly podcast, which I work on presenting and editing that for them. Mm-hmm. But then there are other podcasts that I work on where I don't necessarily work on air. I actually do the behind the scenes stuff. So I produce it, because that's part of my day job, is I produce stuff as well. So you won't necessarily always hear me talking, although people would be surprised to learn once in a while I can shut up if I have to. But you've got the production of podcasts, which I actually help other people to produce podcasts, because I've been in radio now probably about, oh wow, that's really depressing. I've just stopped to think about it. I've been in radio, I think, about 16 years. Mm-hmm. My God, I'm so old.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Anyway, right.
I have to say that because I saw your website, and you said that you're at one point you were the youngest producer for BBC.
Yeah, no, so that wasn't the BBC. So I'll tell you what that was. Is you know, when you and I know, Dennis, I think that it's very important that whenever you present yourself, you have to try and sell yourself at the best. And occasionally we have to use wording that possibly makes us sound better than we actually are. Mm-hmm. Now, even though it is true that, to the best of my knowledge, there was one point in my history where I was the youngest program controller of any radio station in the UK. Okay, so I genuinely do believe that, and I've not been corrected so far. I'm prepared to be corrected, but I don't think I am. So what happened was, at the age of 19, I was the program controller for the hospital radio station that I used to work at. Okay, so that meant I was literally in charge of the output. I was the one who was overseeing what shows were on at what time, who presented them, the style of presentation, all of that. It was literally, I was controlling the output, which is a ridiculous age in hindsight to be in charge of such a thing, because there's no way that at the age of 19 you know everything there is to know about radio. And for goodness sake, I'm 34 now, and even now I find myself learning on a near daily basis some of the things you can and can't do on radio. I've certainly got a very good grasp on it, if I say so myself, because I don't know much else. I know two things in this world. I know radio and I know technology. That's it. You know, anything else is just a bonus. But with radio, there are an awful lot of rules and regulations, and it always amuses me when people say, oh, so you get paid to talk. You go on air and you just talk. No, you don't just talk. There are rules and regulations that you have to know up here to make sure that the program you are working on doesn't either A, get you in trouble, or B, get the station that you're broadcasting on in trouble. It really is not just a case of sit here and talk. But I reckon now, in hindsight, that there was an awful lot that I just happened to get away with. I don't think that it was really a case of, at the age of 19, I knew how to be a program controller, but I was very lucky to be given that opportunity. So yes, I think that was arguably one of my proudest moments, I suppose, especially given that I'd only left school 4 years previously to that. I said I left school at the age of 15. And the reason why I left school at the age of 15, by the way, is I'm perfectly aware that in those days, the legal age to leave school was 16. But my birthday fell in the summer holidays. So technically, I had finished school at the age of 15, if you see what I mean. I didn't have anything else to do with school after that age. So it wasn't that I left school illegally. It was just I was always the youngest in my year group. Because my birthday fell in August, it was always the case that, well, my birthday was in the summer holidays, and therefore when the school year was over, technically that was it. So that's why I left at 15. But I do think that given that I'd left school only 4 years previously to that, that I was very lucky to be given that opportunity. And look, okay, it might have only been a hospital radio station that sadly is no longer around, but it was fun while it lasted. Oh, and I'm hastened to add, by the way, that it carried on after I left. So I wasn't the reason that radio station isn't around anymore.
Now, what I want to ask you, Phil, is that you've been in the broadcast industry for the past 16 years. So is that particular individual was the greatest influence to your work?
Oh, I think it's a combination, you know. I can't say that there's any one. I've always admired people who can talk with fluidity. And by that, I mean, you see now so often in broadcasting, people just can't talk anymore. And it's the most peculiar dichotomy. It's like the most juxtaposed, I think is the better way of putting it, place we find ourselves in. Fancy going into an industry such as broadcasting, which requires you to be able to do one thing, and that is talk. And yet some people who are on air can't talk. Doesn't make sense at all, does it, really, if you think about it? So I've always admired people who can talk and talk well. So instantly, people that springs to mind are people like Sir Trevor McDonald. I think he is a phenomenal broadcaster with an amazing voice and tone. And I have to confess, actually, one time that I met him, I was only given the opportunity to offer him tea or coffee, but I was slightly starstruck. That's probably about the only time in my life when I have genuinely been starstruck. But then there are other people out there who you possibly don't necessarily associate with broadcasting, even though they were in the limelight. But people like Bob Monkhouse, I always admired as well, because he had a way with words that wasn't just brilliantly crafted. It was funny as well and clever. You know, so I would say that instantly those two spring to mind. I think of other wordsmiths and those who work in broadcasting, such as Vanessa Feltz, because I believe that she has the most extraordinary command over the English language. Now, even though there are some times when Vanessa doesn't speak with fluidity. By the way, there's nothing I wouldn't say to her. I love Vanessa. I used to work with her. It's her command over the English language is phenomenal. What she knows and it's the likes of her, and also I tell you, there's someone else. I don't know whether people are familiar with Susie Dent. Susie Dent is a lexicologist who works on Countdown. She's the one who you find in Dictionary Corner, and she's also got the most extraordinary grasp over English. The bottom line is, I love the English language. I really, really love it. I think we are so lucky to be able to speak English, because it's the most diverse language with the most incredible array of options and words that we can use for all sorts of different meanings. And the fact that so many people don't A, know that, and B, put that to good use, I find a travesty. I find it really, really sad. So for me, those are the people who spring to mind straight away. And there are other people that I've worked with who I probably have forgotten to mention, who, when I see them, and I do know them, will probably hate me. But please don't, because there are loads of people who I admire. I'd like to think they know who they are, but I'm talking more about a sense of where I first sort of got the idea of broadcasting from, was those people I've just mentioned.
And Phil, what do you think you would be doing if you didn't work as a broadcaster, as a presenter?
I actually think I know the answer to this, funny enough. And a lot of people would say, I couldn't imagine doing anything else. It's the most get out clause you could ever use, isn't it? I could never imagine doing anything else. I'd always be doing this. Well, no, I won't always be doing this. I know I won't always be doing it. Number one, it's probably not the most fruitful of careers to have. You know, it's not necessarily the most money making. And sadly, we all know we need money to survive in this day and age. I believe that I'd probably be working in property, because I've always had a fascination with property. I love breathing new life into things. So if there is a rundown building that is just sitting there, that's a bit sad, a bit lonely, and a bit, well, let's be honest, a bit knackered, I think that there is nothing more rewarding than breathing new life into it and giving it a new purpose in this world, because otherwise it just goes to waste. And although I'm not part of the whole Greenpeace and Extinction Rebellion lot, I don't necessarily believe in unnecessary waste. And I think one of the most widely accepted forms of waste that we have, particularly in this country, in the UK, is empty property. You know, we're forever talking about how we must build. We need to build new property. Well, no, there's loads of old property out there that's just crying out to be redone. Do that first. Don't start building all over Greenland and things like that. Just heal it, make it better, make it actually have a purpose in life again. And that, I think, will solve an awful lot of problems. So that, for me, is probably what I would be doing. I've got a bit of a passion about it. I'm very, very interested in it. And I actually, dare I suggest, do occasionally dabble in it as well. So I do actually do bits of property stuff here and there as and when I can.
That's an interesting trivia about you, Phil. Now, being a broadcaster is stressful, as is experiencing baldness. That's stressful. So what's your distressing outlet? How do you relax?
Well, this might sound really silly, but I work. I know that sounds really daft, because that sounds almost like an oxymoron. Well, why are you going to work to relax? And I find that when I am working, I'm in my natural habitat. And it's when you're in that natural habitat is when you're most relaxed. So that's what I think I do a lot of the time to work. If it had to be non-work related, I'd say it's walking. I love walking, just anywhere. You know, I could be, if I'm in central London, you remember when we could go there? But if I'm in central London.
Was that last year?
Oh, I tell you what, I don't start to forget what central London looks like at this rate. But anyway, because I live in Hertfordshire, so I'm not actually really a Londoner anymore. But anyway, but when you're in London, a lot of the time people would just jump on the tube to get themselves from A to B. Even if it's a 5-minute journey. I know people who go on the tube for one stop. Why are you going to do that? There is so many amazing places around to look at and to explore and to experience. And the only way to really experience it is by foot. Just get out and walk. And that's what I love doing. And I like walking in all settings, by the way. Cool. I like walking in central London in the hustle and bustle of people, when we could get near to other people. When I was not so much now, I could avoid other people happily. The other thing I like doing is obviously walking around more of a countrified area. So any greenery and plants and trees. And I actually found myself, I think for the first time ever, enjoying spring more than ever this year, funnily enough. And I also like exploring abroad. So whenever I've been somewhere that I've not been before, I like walking around an area that I've no idea where I'm going. I don't want a map. I just need my eyes and just follow myself. I just literally say, okay, well, let's see what's down here. And that's what I do. So walking is a massive, massive part of how I relax.
And finally, Phil, what else is in the pipeline and where can we learn more about you? And of course, invite us to your podcast and to your shows.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Well, I suppose that the best way to keep on top of things is to possibly find me on social media on Twitter at Mr. Phil Dave, and Phil with one L, so PhilDave, at Mr. Phil Dave on Twitter. And I also have, unbelievably enough, a website as well. That's mrphildave.com, I believe, or possibly .co.uk. That's terrible. I don't know my own website, but hey, I don't visit it very often. But I think you'll find it. I tell you, you will find phildave.co.uk. That's one way. There's two websites I've got which lead to the same place. So phildave.co.uk will do nicely. And as far as the podcasts are concerned, a reminder that they are the Jewish views, as in point of view in the plural, and the Jewish news. So just to be nice and confusing, they're the two podcasts that I mainly work on. And of course, let's not forget Men's Radio Station. And even though you don't hear me on air very often, you can sometimes find me on Talk Radio and Talk Sport. So I think that's all the different places you'll find me. But like I said, the website's probably easiest. And just finally, I might stress as well that it's curious what we're talking about mental health and anxiety is that I actually made a decision earlier in this year to kind of back off a little bit from social media. So if I'm a bit quiet on there, forgive me. It's just because I found it recently to be a bit of a cesspit. So I thought much better off just to step back from social media and let people get on with whatever they want to get on with. But
I agree with that. Twitter is getting really worse the past few months even. But anyway, Phil, it's been an insightful conversation with you, but unfortunately our time is up. Thank you for sharing your experience and your insights. It's been amazing talking to you. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to hearing more about your work.
Thank you, Dennis. And can I just say, it's really, really good to see you again. It's been a long time. And it's been nice to chat. So thank you.
Thank you.